This special episode of OutDrank The Coverage, the live draft show, is brought to you by the Frisco Bar and Grill. They're located at 6750 Gaylord Parkway, Suite 120 in Frisco. You can find them online at thefriscobar.com. I'm telling you, folks, if you're a sports fan, a karaoke fan, or a fan of live music and trivia, this is the place you want to be. They not only have great food, great drinks, they have great prices, and they have a great atmosphere. I'm telling you, this is where old friends meet and new friends are found. I promise you, you will love the Frisco Bar and Grill. Intern Noe and I will be talking about it during the draft show, but we love their appetizers. We love their wings. I love their sliders. My girlfriend loves the karaoke. Hey, if you're a fan of Oklahoma Sooners or San Francisco 49ers, the Frisco Bar and Grill is the official watch party place for both of those. And intern Noe and I was there for a Monday night game last year when San Francisco was playing, and the atmosphere is absolutely amazing. You cannot beat it. So check out the Frisco Bar and Grill, located at 6750 Gaylord Parkway, Suite 120 in Frisco, where old friends meet.
I want to tell you, we did it our way, baby. We did it. We did it. We did it.
I'm ready.
1995, a Dallas Cowboy team that the year before had fallen short, come back up to the top of the mountain, and little did we know that would be the last time for a long time, maybe of all time. Hello, everybody. Terry Bennett, intern Noe here. OutDrank The Coverage from the studios. And as you can tell by the table, we've got the 1995 playoff tree set up because we're here to talk about the 1995 Dallas Cowboys. Third Super Bowl win in 4 years. If you don't know that, it's not a spoiler, folks. If you're listening to the show, I hope you know how the season ends. And it's a weird season. It's an odd season. We'll talk a little bit. We talked a little bit in the 93 show, which if you haven't listened to, it's above or down here on YouTube. 95 is a weird season because I was telling you, and we have a poignant question in the next show where we talk about, like, is it still fun to be a Cowboy fan? And I told you that, like, 95, 92 was fresh. 93 was still cool. 95, it became a chore. Like, if Dallas did, it got to the point where you weren't happy that they won. You were just happy they didn't lose, if that makes sense. And I know that Troy Aikman and Jimmy Johnson, all of them talk about that. That's actually a mark of a true good team is they don't want to win. They just don't want to lose. But as a fan, we shouldn't have to feel that way, in my opinion. As a fan, it should be you're just enjoying the game. I think sometimes you and I do a really good job of it, but even us, we lose the narrative of this is supposed to be entertaining. Like, no matter what happens, you're supposed to be able to say, you know what, I had a fun Sunday. Cowboys win, Cowboys lose. We watched a lot of football, had some food, had some drinks, had some fellowship, had a great time. It's sometimes you can't do that when you're with a franchise that has an expectation, right or wrong at this point, because it has been since 1995. Yeah. But it's hard to be a fan sometimes of a team that has expectations. That's why I always joke that the Rangers ruined me in 2012 because up until that point, they were just a fun team. Yeah. I didn't expect them to win. And then they get to one out twice to winning a World Series, and they don't. I literally feel that it completely changed my sports viewing as forever. Like, I just don't. I don't know. We'll talk about that in the next show. But anyway, before we get into all that, intern Noe, how are you doing and what are you drinking?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Mm-hmm. Today I am doing an old fashioned
for this show.
For this show, yes. Prior show I did beer, but for this show I did an old fashioned. I was digging through your fridge, seeing what I could scrummage up.
Oh, wait.
And I saw some cherries. So I was like, hey, you know what? You have some whiskey.
That was from the 77 show.
Probably, yeah.
I'm doing Lone Star vodka in my 1989 Southwest Conference cup, which I still absolutely love. By the way, speaking of the at midnight, July 3rd, or 1st, it was the Big 12 became the Big 14 -2 that's going to be leaving. Just by the way, to remind you that we will be having an OutDrank the College show this year. But anyway, so we talked about in the last show. 93 was the first time you followed the Cowboys fully. Yeah. All you knew were wins. So before we get to 95, what did the end of 94 do to you? When they lose to San Francisco, not only lose, but lose in the most non-Cowboy way of that era. 3 turnovers early, down 21-0. Still, to my opinion, the most valiant game of the era besides the Emmitt Smith shoulder game in 93. Troy Aikman's even talked about when he thinks of the Cowboys of that era, it's not the Super Bowls, it's that game, because right or wrong, they got to within a non-call of Deion Sanders and Barry Switzer being stupid and bumping the official away from possibly making what would have been an amazing comeback. But what were your thoughts after that 94 season?
Man, I was so sad seeing them not make it to the Super Bowl because I knew they would have beaten the Chargers, just like what San Francisco did. I was also impressed because they were very gutsy. I mean, I was so proud, to be a Cowboy fan just because of Aikman's resilience, how he wielded the team back. I mean, it was 21-0 before I could blink my eye,
Yep.
and then Cowboys just started coming back and churning points out. And like you said, a non-call kind of ended, and then Switzer getting the 15 yards penalty just for getting on the field and arguing a call that also didn't help either. So I was sad that 94 ended the way it did, but I was thinking, carry this over to 95. This team can win a Super Bowl again.
Yeah. I'm like you as far as the comeback. I do think not only the call against Sanders non-call, I think the fumble that Irvin that they called a fumble was not a fumble. If you look at it, always the Sunday now. And if you're a non-Cowboy fan, go look it up. That wasn't a fumble. Like he had no control of the ball. It literally went into his hands. It was an incomplete pass. Yeah, it was, and that could, it wasn't even at that point Dallas needing to score. Just punt the ball. Yeah. Just have to punt the ball. Let your defense get set. But at the end of the day, you got to give the Niners credit. 94, they went all out for that season. And you could make the case that maybe that's what hurt them in 95, to where they were still so Dallas obsessed that they overlooked Green Bay in that divisional round. We'll talk about that when we get there. But for the Cowboys, for me, I kind of felt like you did. I still kind of felt like if you'd have told me in 95 that was their last not only Super Bowl but NFC title game, I'd have thought you were crazy. I thought talent-wise, they had plenty to at least still, and technically they were. Again, they have the dip in 97, but they make the playoffs in 96. They make the playoffs in 98. They make the playoffs in 99. We talk about the 99 season if Michael Irvin doesn't get hurt. I do at least think that they're a team in the playoffs that's actually a legitimate team and not just, but anyway, in that moment, I don't know, 94 was rough. It was rough because it was obvious that Barry Switzer was not Jimmy Johnson, and it wasn't on the field as much as it was off the field, because if anybody thinks that everything that happened from 95 on, like the White House, the Michael Irvin, the Eric Williams 94 car wreck, if all y'all think that just started when Jimmy left, you're fooled. Jimmy just did a good job of basically the players. You keep that stuff away from the field. You don't let it affect the field. And I think with Barry, it was a little different. And it wasn't that Barry wanted him to go out and party and get hurt, but it wasn't the accountability. There was no fear of Barry Switzer like there was Jimmy. And so I guess I kind of realized in 95, it was going to have to be all talent. And we were talking about this off the air, and we were talking about it for our 1990 versus 1970 Cowboys. This Dallas team, it was about coaching, but it wasn't about scheme. Dallas didn't out-scheme you. And that's awesome. But the problem is when Dallas stopped being the most talented on the field, they didn't have a fallback to, we will at least trick you. We'll make you think we're doing this. Dallas couldn't do that. And I think you started to see that in 95, even though they still were 12-4, led the league in offense. By all accounts, one of the most explosive offenses in the history of the NFL, but it felt like everything they had to do in that year was just so hard. Like, especially from about week 9 on. And part of that's because Aikman was hurt for a lot of that, but it just, from 94 to 95, it just didn't seem easy anymore.
I would say the second half for sure looked like that. The first half, I mean, they were 8-1, killing teams. It wasn't even close, but yeah, second half of the season, especially that 3-game stretch against Washington, against Philadelphia, and for the most part against New York, Dallas struggled. They had no offensive identity. I don't know what was going on there, but I think they just got to a point where they just couldn't rely on the triplets anymore to win games.
And let's remember this. Washington swept Dallas in 95.
Yeah.
Now, that started a big thing So at this point, you had Skip Bayless coming on the scene. He was with the Ticket. In fact, he was the very first morning host of the Ticket, and so he was there. And this was Skip Bayless. Up until this point, Skip Bayless was a writer for the Dallas Times-Herald, and he was an out there guy. He was doing what writers do, and he would come at things from different angles, things like that. And some of it would make you think, okay, yeah, that's interesting. But he also started his salacious stuff with like Troy being gay. That's a real big thing. He wrote the book, and I've read the book, and to be honest with you, it's an enjoyable book.
Yeah.
But he wrote the book about that, and he wrote about, Troy. And one of the stories was that Troy basically threw the Redskin games because North Turner was their coach. Because if you remember in one of those games, the first game, like the second play or something, he pulls his calf. He's going to throw the ball and he pulls his calf. And so he doesn't play. They lose 27-23. And then in Dallas in December, they lose 24-17 and he doesn't play well. And so that started the whole Skip Bayless saying that Troy Aikman, he didn't try against North Turner. That's the kind of Dallas had got to the point where they're at the top of the mountain. So instead of being pushed up, they were now being tore down. And that's how society treats things. Somebody comes out of nowhere, they do good, everybody loves them until there's a line where they stop loving them and then they just want them to fail. And Dallas was squarely in the bad guy territory. Not only because it's the Cowboys, and the Cowboys were always loved or hated, but even back in the 70s, the teams that hated them would then say, yeah, but man, Tom Landry's a great coach and a great guy, and Roger Staubach's Captain America. This Cowboys, unless you're a Cowboy fan, was hard to like. I mean, I loved them, but and let's be honest, they were the 90s. You look at, they were what the Hurricanes of the 80s were. They were trash talking because they were mostly Hurricanes. But they were trash talking. They were loud. They were brash. They were, we're going to tell you what play we're going to run, and we're going to run it, and you're not going to be able to stop it. And so the 70s Cowboys were loved to be hated and all, but the 90s Cowboys were fully the Darth Vader of the NFL. When you can make San Francisco appear to be the good guys, you're the bad guys, because San Francisco in the 80s were the machine. They have no emotion. They gut you. And then in the 90s, it was a team that was basically built to beat the Cowboys, became the favorites because they were well liked. And I think all that matters. And I think the 90s was a culture point where trash talking became more acceptable in sports. Like now you look at baseball now. Dude, when I played, if you'd shown up a pitcher, you're getting thrown at the next time. Now they don't care, which I'm fine with. I've never understood why you get mad when somebody. That's what sports is, emotions and stuff. But anyway, so it was. I go back to what we're talking about. It was hard to be. I know this sounds weird. It was hard to be a Cowboy fan in '95.
Maybe because of the expectations.
That's what I'm saying. It wasn't about winning. It was just don't lose. And if you do win, and we'll talk about it. Like you look at how the season started, and they're 4-0. And they're rolling, and people are starting to talk, can this team lose? And then they lose to the Redskins. But then they win the next 4 games, and they don't lose again till San Francisco. But all you could talk about for 3 weeks after that Redskin loss was how they lost to the Redskins.
Yeah.
Not how they beat a Green Bay team that they would see, 3 months later in an NFC title game. Not talking about beating a Charger team that you're seeing in the Super Bowl, the year before. I mean, those were 2 good teams that Dallas beat 34-24 and 23-9. All people could talk about, but that Washington game.
Well, and with San Diego, that was the one game where Stan Humphries didn't play. Gilbert, I think, played.
Gilbert.
With the Raider game, the game after the 49er game, Hostetler was hurt, I think, for the rest of the season or for most of the season. And then Vince Evans played in that game. So, there was a lot of games where Dallas played against backup quarterbacks.
Well, we didn't really talk about it. And it's funny, I had meant to have it on my notes and I forgot, but that happened in 93 as well. That's when like Seattle played Dan Larson.
92.
Dan McGuire. Yeah. 92. They ran through a stretch where they didn't play starting quarterbacks. And so a lot of people thought, oh, hey, that they might not be as good as we think. They're playing bad. So
Hostetler started the game. He didn't finish.
Yeah, because he threw an interception. He's the one that threw the interception to Dion.
They both went into the game 8-2, so that was like a premier game.
But the shine off was on Dallas was off because of the San Francisco game, which we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Yeah.
But let's go and start at the beginning. We start at the beginning because they came out on Monday Night Football, and did everything that you thought the Cowboys were going to do. Second play of the game, Emmitt Smith. I actually had that and I forgot to load it. But anyway, Emmitt Smith goes 60 yards for a touchdown. They dominate a giant team that many people thought was reloading after that night. We talked about them in 93 and then 94. They had a kind of a dip and they were supposed to be back and they were going to be the team that challenged Dallas. And Dallas just absolutely throttled them. But Kevin Smith tears his Achilles. That right there was the moment that Dallas was getting Deion. I don't know if Jerry goes after Deion. He goes after him, but I don't think he goes after him if Kevin Smith doesn't get hurt.
And then Jerry Jones and Deion Sanders did a bunch of commercials together.
Oh, yeah, the Pizza Hut, using the Dallas theme. I always loved that. That was fun. I love Deion. Deion Sanders is one of my favorite Cowboys.
They were kind of playing off of him playing two sports.
Yeah, because they were doing the double. It was stuffed crust and something else, and why not both? Yeah.
So just to recap, after 93 season, Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones mutually agree to have Jimmy Johnson not be the coach of the Cowboys.
Yes.
In comes former Oklahoma Sooners head coach Barry Switzer. So he was the head coach for the 94 season. They run through one of the best teams that year. One of the highlights or lowlights of that season was Eric Williams' car crash.
Yeah, that's what we talked about earlier. He was partying after they beat the Cardinals.
Yeah.
If you know Dallas, he was over there by 635 in the tollway. There's a big middle part.
Yeah.
And he basically was drunk and ran off the road and hit an embankment. And by all accounts, is lucky to be alive.
Yeah.
Shredded his knee. Basically derailed a Hall of Fame career. Now, you and I can make the case that he probably still should be in the Hall of Fame because his after years were still pretty darn solid.
Yeah.
But he lost. When Eric Williams lost the shine, the Cowboys, I felt like that was the moment that the Cowboys lost that invincibility. Because from up to that point, any injury was bad but never serious. You didn't lose Emmitt for a whole year. Aikman would be hurt for 2 or 3 games, but nobody was completely lost for a full year.
Yeah.
And they were mean, they were ugly, like I said, they were brash. When Eric Williams got hurt, something changed that day. Yeah. And I think sometimes we need to realize how special it is they still won a Super Bowl in 95. Again, we take for granted that they won it because they struggled at times still with a 12-4 record, best offense in the league, one of the top 3 best defenses and stuff.
Yeah.
But it just felt different. And I think even you at 10 at this point realized it just felt different. Each game felt different. Even games where they won comfortably still felt like there was a lot more struggle in it.
Yeah.
They didn't seem quite as prepared. You didn't see the onside kicks. You didn't see special teams with blocks. You didn't see a lot of the things that Jimmy Johnson instilled in his team. And whether Barry was the right guy after or not, it doesn't matter. It just was different. Not necessarily bad, but different.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, the difference coordinator, Norv Turner left to be the Redskin head coach, and they were replaced by Rams offensive coordinator Ernie Zampese.
Which was his mentor.
Yeah. And so that was one thing. And then so the 94 draft wasn't that great, but they did get Larry Allen, future Hall of Fame, the one Hall of Famer from the offensive line for the Dallas Cowboys. They also got Chris Boniel and Richie Cunningham in this draft, and there were UFA players, and then Tony Richardson, who ended up being a Kimball Andrews replacement at fullback for the Chiefs in the late 90s. Let's see. Oh, yeah. And a couple of departures from that team outside of Norv Turner was also Ken Norton, the stout linebacker.
A huge loss.
Yeah, a huge loss. He ended up being 49er and then win a Super Bowl with the 49ers. So he was, I think, the first player to win 3 straight Super Bowls.
Yep.
So it was kind of a historic moment there.
And again, San Francisco that year, they brought him in, Gary Plummer, Dion.
Ricky Jackson, Charles Mann.
They literally brought all their whole goal was beat Dallas.
Yeah.
Beat Dallas.
Yeah. They drafted William Floyd that year too.
And we talked about that. He's one of those that even though he was on the Niners, I always loved watching him play.
Yeah.
Notre Dame back. He was loud, again, brash, loud, but backed it up. And he added an edge to that 94 team because that 94 team stopped being scared of Dallas. And it carried over into 95. And again, we'll get to that when we get to that part of the season. But anyway, so Dallas comes into this. They beat the Giants 35-0, dominate. Everything looks fine. They look great the first 4 weeks. Again, they beat Denver 31-21. They beat Minnesota. That's the famous TNT was doing Sunday night then. Yeah. And them in NFL Films did a cool thing called 7 Days to Sunday. Yep. And I think the idea, from what I remember, the idea was to make that a weekly thing, but it was like it just took so much to film and everything. And this was back before you have now, or you have like Amazon doing series of that and stuff. But it was fun. If you've never seen it, go to YouTube, just type in 7 Days of Sunday TNT, and it basically just follows Minnesota and Dallas for the week of that game. And it's fun watching Dennis Green. He did a coach's show, and he'd play the drums on the coach's show. Rest in peace. I always liked Dennis Green.
Yeah, me too.
Rest in peace, Dennis Green. But it was fun seeing it from the Minnesota side, how they talked about Dallas. And for Dallas side, it wasn't. They showed hardly any coaches. It was just Charles Haley in the locker room making fun of everybody and things like that. But it's really fun. But anyway, so they were 3-0. As I said, they beat Arizona 34-20, dominate them, almost 500 yards of total offense. Then they lose to Washington. Aikman gets hurt. Then they play Green Bay, and Green Bay up until this point was still, Green Bay's fun to watch, but at the end of the day, they're not gonna make the big plays.
Still one of my favorite plays in the whole Brett Favre's career was in that game.
The pump fake.
He already got the first down, and then he pump faked, and it still made one of the Dallas defenders move.
Brock Marion.
Yeah, Brock Marion. Yeah, this is his first year as a free safety starting for the Cowboys.
In that game, he threw for 295 yards. He had one interception. Aikman threw for 300 yards. Aikman didn't throw for 300 a lot back then. But what you were starting to see this year was the passing game without Alvin Harper, became more onto Michael Irvin and Novacek, which gave them huge numbers, but it hurt the Dallas offense overall until that Giant game. Kevin Williams woke up in that game, and we'll talk about that. I have that. I told one of the first times we hung out and talked football, I told you that one of the most underrated moments in Cowboy history was Kevin Williams against the Giants after they lost 2 in a row, about to lose 3. And we talked about it, in the 93, if they lose to the Giants at the last game, they don't win the Super Bowl. If they don't beat the Giants, then they make the playoffs, but I think they get beat. That team was done.
Yeah.
You could tell at that point, Aikman was starting to say some of the things that he talked about. In fact, here's what Aikman had to say about Switzer and everything.
Barry Switzer had won a title, but his coaching philosophy compared to Jimmy Johnson's could not have been more different.
Barry wanted to believe that at this level, that everybody was a man.
I don't have a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old boys that I have to shape and mold and do things like that. You're men, so I'm going to trust you to do the right thing. Oh, we had a couple guys that you probably shouldn't give that much trust to.
The classic story during that whole time, we're in Cowboys training camp. The night before, Michael Irvin had led a whole group of guys out on the town, and they all came in like at 6 in the morning. And they were all hungover. And you could see it. Everybody was half sick, kind of moping around. And Switzer walks up to Aikman and says, "What do you want me to do, cut Michael Irvin?" And Aikman looks at him and says, "No, you don't cut Michael Irvin, but you cut that guy, and that guy, and you make everybody run until they throw up in the grass." And Switzer says, "Well, I'm not going to do that." About 10 minutes in, he blows his whistle and says, "Boys, you're not really into it today. Let's call it a day." And Aikman was livid.
Troy, I'll never forget one time he said, "We need some harder, more physical practices." Now, Barry winked and said, "The only one I've ever heard say that's a quarterback."
What I found was that the Barry Switzer that I played for at Oklahoma was not the Barry Switzer that I played for with the Dallas Cowboys. At Oklahoma, there was a great deal of pressure on him when I got there in 1984. So I played for a guy that was very intense. I said, "Coach, let me ask you," I said, "if you look back, when you were 30 years old coaching at Oklahoma, I bet you worked your tail off. And I bet now you didn't go about it the same way." And he agreed. He said, "There's no question." I said, "Well, I'm that 30-year-old guy now. I'm not winding down the years and saying, okay, well, I'm only going to coach another year or two. I didn't even expect to get this job. This is important to me."
I think Troy didn't like the way my style versus Jimmy's style. I knew that. That's not going to happen because I'm not Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson couldn't coach my way either.
Am I happy with my relationship with Aikman? As I've told you before, I don't know where Chuck Noll had a great relationship with Terry Bradshaw or not. It wasn't important. He won 4 Super Bowls, right? That's the bottom line. I'm not going to drink RC Colas and double date and, with them. We're not going to do those things. It's not part of the game. It's not important.
When Jimmy was the head coach, it was a good cop, bad cop type relationship.
Hold on that damn football! God dog it!
He'd rip into guys, and guys are upset and frustrated, and I'd say, hey, just let it go. Let it go. Hey, don't worry about him. Let's just go practice. But deep down, I agreed with everything that he said. And then after he left, there was nobody that was doing that. It was very difficult then to always be the bad guy.
Pack! You got packed. 136 pack. You know the play? Yeah. Guys, we're junior high. That's junior high. That's so damn pitiful it ain't even funny. Let's go. You know, we're not good enough. We're not as good as we used to be, continually overcome that. You know, we can't have negative plays.
I remember a time I was hurt. Troy came to me and said, I need you to practice. I just need you out there. 16. Practices are different without you being out there. I need you out there driving the guys. He said, it's just a difference. And that was the first time I really felt like I feel the pressure. I feel that he feels he has to do the things that Jimmy used to do to keep everybody there. And I'm sure that took a lot of fun out of it for him.
As great as the first part of my career was, the back half of my career was every bit as frustrating. Once Jimmy left, I felt like we were kind of hanging on. We weren't as good in '94 as we had been in '93. In '95, we won the Super Bowl, but we weren't as good of a football team in '95 as we had been in '94. And it continued.
In the 1996 playoffs, the mighty Cowboys were taken down by a second-year expansion team. In '97, they hit bottom. Aikman felt it coming. In preseason,
Hey, guys, that's a embarrassment out there. That's a damn embarrassment. We can't block anybody up the hour hugging the ball early. Junior League. Somebody's got to get their attention, and I'll tell you, Jack, I am tired of being a guy who's got to run down everybody's damn throat all the time. Why don't we have a coach that gets over there and does something about it? Instead, we want to go over and pat everybody on the ass, and they haven't done a job all night. Guys out there off, and nobody says anything about it. We got a head coach that won't say anything about it. We got coaches offensively who won't do anything about it. I mean, enough's enough. Babysitting's over.
the Cowboys finished with the winning record in only one of Aikman's final 4 seasons.
All right, so
I love it.
I love it too, but I do think so. One of the things where Dale Hansen was talking about when they talked about Michael Irvin and then went out and partied, and Switzer said, "What do you mean do? Cut Irvin?" And Aikman said, "No, but I want you to cut him, him, and him." Okay, so this is one of those things where Aikman, the player, doesn't understand that by 95 there was a salary cap.
Yeah,
you can't do what Jimmy Johnson did. There's a reason why Jimmy Johnson didn't win in Miami like he did in Dallas, partly because Dan Marino would just never give up the run game. Yeah. For all the talk about why Dan Marino didn't win the Super Bowl, I think he needs some of the blame. But the other thing is Jimmy couldn't churn the roster.
Yeah,
that's what we talked about in the 93 and the 92, that what made Jimmy Johnson a great coach was he was a talent acquisitioner type guy. He could see talent. He knew that, hey, if I give Jimmy Jones 18 snaps on the defensive line, he's going to be great. If I give him 25, that's too many. But what he could also do is cut Curvin Richards because he fumbled in the last game. Yeah. You couldn't do that in 1995. It's a salary cap hit. And so I agree with everything that Troy Aikman said, but I also think that Troy Aikman didn't adjust like he should have. You got to realize he even said, okay, when Jimmy was here, it was bad cop, good cop. Okay, so why didn't you become bad cop? Why didn't you and Michael Irvin work together? You know, and I'm not saying that Troy Aikman is at fault in any way, but I'm just saying he didn't adjust either. Like it or not, Barry Switzer was your head coach, and you just have to accept that. But he also was 100% right in that Barry, and Michael said it best, though. Barry Switzer thought, okay, y'all are adults. Be adults.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked about that. I've never been a big get motivated to when I played sports. I didn't get motivated. I didn't need to. I love to play sports. I wanted to go out and I competed as hard as I could.
Yeah.
I never understood, and I struggled when people needed to be motivated. I never understood, well, why do you need to be motivated? Go do it. And so I understand Barry's idea of, okay, y'all are all 30-year-olds. Go be 30-year-olds. But again, Under Jimmy, there was a tight thumb, and when that tight thumb was leave, it was almost like when mom and dad are away and you've got the babysitter or you've got the substitute teacher.
Yeah.
People like Michael Irvin, who could go party all night and then go out and perform, the people under him couldn't. So I understand that too. Again, let's just admit at the end of the day, Barry Switzer was just not. I mean, he won a Super Bowl and he went to 2 NFC title games, but he should not have been hired. I will never understand. And I actually liked Barry Switzer. I was a Longhorn fan, still am, but I loved the wishbone. I loved Jamel Holloway, the early 80s teams.
Irving MacArthur's own Brian Bosworth.
Irving MacArthur's own Brian Bosworth, the second best player ever in the history of there. But I liked Barry, but I never understood the hire then. And so I just, that's one of those things I just wish Jerry now would be like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
You know, I love Barry. Barry's a great guy. He won us a Super Bowl, but at the end of the day, I should not have hired him. We talked about it. Offer Norv Turner that job.
He had just left already for the Redskin job.
You could figure that out. You knew Jimmy was leaving. You figure that out.
Well, you know what?
Yeah.
Norv Turner was the offensive coordinator. They could have just promoted him. Yeah.
Just promoted him.
For some reason, I was thinking he already left.
Because it never made sense why he wasn't promoted or Butch Davis wasn't promoted. Yeah. Promote within if you want to.
Yeah.
Hell, give it to Joe Avazano. Rest in peace. God, you know you're getting old. When I was talking about that, thinking of all the like Dennis Green, rest in peace. Hub Alexander, rest in peace. You know, all the coaches then. But yeah, so I just wanted to get that out of the way before we get into the meat of this season, as we're 31 minutes into this show.
There's a lot to talk about.
Well, there really is, because again, this was it was right before the White House stuff.
Yeah.
It was right before Johnny Hernandez trying to kill Irvin, but all the rumors were I mean, when you lived in Dallas, I mean, dude, you had a sports radio station in the ticket that had started in 94 or 93 at the end of the 93 season. And they were the first and the only at the time sports station. They were hearing all the rumors. I ended up, at this time, I wasn't wanting to do this as a career. I was just a working man, Joe. And then I went back to college. But then I ended up interning at the ticket in the early 2000s.
You were a working stiff like Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah, was. I always laugh at that because he still was getting paid like $300,000 a year. But that's how good he was. Nobody in the media calls him out on that. They're all just like, "Oh yeah, you're working stiff like
he's
me."
Relatable.
Yeah, he's relatable. But I worked at the ticket, interned in the early 2000s, and talking to some of those about that was the first thing I was like, were the stories as crazy? And they're like, yeah, they're crazier. Like, we want to talk about Michael Irvin almost cutting a guy's throat, Everett McIver's throat.
Allegedly.
I mean, yeah, blood everywhere. Should have been in jail.
He probably fell on those scissors.
Right across the throat. Perfect. That is scary. I mean, all jokes aside, that's scary.
I mean, that could have been a murder charge.
Well, I mean, it really could have been. I mean, you're exactly right. But anyway, and they're all like, yeah, it was actually worse. From what we heard, it was worse than that. And again, not all that was just because Barry. This stuff started under Jimmy because this stuff was at Miami. Yeah. Jimmy's whole thing is you don't bring it to the practice field. You don't bring it to the field. And again, so that's why I also go back and sometimes think that this is the most remarkable Super Bowl of the three. Because Dallas somehow, as terrible as they were, with a schedule that was considered like the third toughest in the league, goes 12-4. They score, 400 and something points. They give up under 300. And yet when you look at the season, you feel like they struggled, and they really didn't. But that's just where they were at that time. And that's also why dynasties are hard.
Yeah.
And that's why Bill Belichick did how he did in the Patriots, and everything was, and still to this day, kept in-house. Tom Landry, in-house. Jimmy Johnson, in-house, because when players start to win, they start to get content. And that's also why Jimmy admits he probably couldn't have stayed as a head coach, because each year he'd have to get tougher and tougher and tougher. And again, the players now claim, oh, we'd have won 5 Super Bowls with Jimmy. And you probably would have, but y'all were also the ones that in 1995 were saying, yeah, we probably don't get to the Super Bowl with Jimmy because he'd run us so ragged. We were so on edge, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I knew this was going to happen. I keep feeling like we're talking about a team that failed. They freaking won the Super Bowl. This team won the Super Bowl. And by most accounts, every game kind of dominated, but we always remember the San Francisco game.
Man, that was they were not prepared to play the 49ers.
That's the game. The 94 NFC title game, you can say that shows you without Jimmy Johnson, but you also felt San Francisco. That was 2 years in the making for San Francisco.
Yeah.
This is the one at home. You've got the Niners are reeling. Elvis Gerback is their quarterback.
Yeah.
They're struggling. You kind of feel like if you beat them, you might just completely knock them out for the year. They were living off the Super Bowl. Dion wasn't on there. They were still good, but they were missing something, which ends up showing up later on in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And they don't just beat Dallas. They go out and dominate Dallas. It's 38-20, which it ain't even that close. So in back-to-back games, they gave up 38 points to the Niners, and they only scored 28 and 20. That's where that season feels like it got lost. And again, they still win the Super Bowl, but that's where now they did beat the Raiders and the Chiefs, and Chiefs, one of my favorite games of all time, Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah.
Michael Irvin had my favorite catch. Jay Novacek, one of the most classic plays, leaping over the defender. But then they lose back-to-back games to Washington and Philadelphia, and you feel like at this point, man, if Dallas just get to the playoffs and, hey, it's been great. We won. I can remember thinking, hey, we won 2 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
It's been great. We won 2 Super Bowls. But this is where also the championship team starts to show themselves. Okay, so let's first talk about – we want to go ahead and talk about it. Here is, of course, the famous play. Jaguar, one of our favorite YouTubers, called it the dumbest decision in NFL history.
Oh, the 4th and 1. Okay.
The 4th and 1. Here it is. And this is the play.
They need 10 for a first. And Troy Aikman back to throw. Gets it out. Not enough for a first down. To Corey Fleming. He's saying he was up and knocked backwards. He was up.
Ray Rhodes wanted his corners to be physical. They are physical. Watch Mark McMillan come up here now. Boom, he makes that tackle right there. That ball should be spotted right there. That shouldn't even be close to a first down.
And Dallas is going to go for it.
Oh, I don't believe in this. I think a tie score on this situation, unless they're going to try and draw them offside, I think they cannot go for it here.
Emmitt Smith's the deep back. Emmitt Smith gets the carry. He doesn't make it.
No, that's a bad call. You can't do that. Look at the Eagles. They know that call could have won the Eagles this game.
They're at field goal range right now.
Right now, and then all they have to do is run that clock down.
Now they're saying maybe the 2-minute warning ran out.
No, I don't think so. That ball was snapped before, and you can't stop the play in the middle of the play for the 2-minute warning. No, that's the Eagles' ball. The Eagles stopped them. It's their ball.
Barry Switzer is saying the 2-minute warning.
Barry Switzer ought to be saying that he shouldn't have called that play.
No question he didn't get the first down. He's nowhere
close. He didn't get it. That's great defense. The Eagles were all up there.
There is nothing there. Now let's see. The Cowboys offensive unit still on the field.
Well, maybe they're saying that the 2 minutes.
The ball was snapped. Watch the official on the far side of the field. He is signaling no play.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. They did say the 2 minutes came up before the ball was snapped. Official here, he's going to stop the play before the ball snapped. He's going to say the 2-minute warning. No, I don't think he did. That ball was snapped before he did that.
Yep.
That's not right either.
He's saying no play.
I know, but he has to say it before the ball snapped. After the ball is snapped, it doesn't make any difference when the 2 minutes come up.
The clock has been reset. The last time before we took that break, it was at 1:58 seconds. Now it's 2 minutes.
Yeah, and if that official's going to stop it, he has to stop it before it's snapped.
The 2-minute warning occurred before the ball was snapped. Therefore, it's fourth down.
I don't believe that. I mean, the official didn't signal the 2-minute warning until after the ball was snapped. If the ball snapped, you don't stop the play for the 2-minute warning. I'm still surprised the Cowboys are going for it again. I think that was a bad call the first time they did it. I think it's a bad call now.
It's fourth, and it's still a foot. Emmitt Smith is still deep with Darrell Johnston in front of him. Same play. Didn't get it again.
Didn't get it again. That's unbelievable. This is unbelievable. What in the heck is going on?
What in the heck is going on? I meant to say this in the 93, the Emmitt Smith injury game, that John Madden, that was like the only time ever as a broadcaster that he went downstairs and talked to a player in the locker room. This call, the 4th and 1, was one of the only times that Madden openly questioned a call to the point where he's literally saying, I don't agree with what you're doing, and why the hell are you doing it again? It was a bad call. I understand going for it the first time. I understand going for it in general. If you don't remember, Dallas was up early in that game. It's in Philadelphia. Philadelphia's fighting for their playoff lives. They come back, they tie it, and it's like a 25-mile-an-hour wind that the Cowboys are into. I get why. But when it doesn't work the first time, you either punt and hope you can get good punt, or as we talked about it off the air, William Fuller Eagle said if Cowboys would just play action past it on that second one, he goes, every wide receiver would have been open. Aikman would have basically had 4 guys to pick from.
Yeah.
It was the arrogance of that.
The only thing I think of,
and that's not Switzer. I want to go ahead and put this right here on the record. That's not Switzer calling the play.
Yeah.
That was Ernie Zampese thinking for whatever reason. But you also want to say you have the leading rusher at 1,700 yards for the season with the best offensive line.
That's what I'm saying. Like he was thinking talent versus talent.
Exactly.
Dallas has the better team. And it's just, you should not call the same play twice.
Well, and that goes back to what we've talked about with, I meant to have this playing the whole time.
Receiver Isaac Bruce contributing to a block.
That's where we go back to what we were talking about earlier when you talk about the team. The one negative about the 90s Dallas team was it was all about their talent. Coaching was good, but there was no scheme. You didn't hide things.
Yeah.
San Francisco with Bill Walsh, if you figured out a way to stop Jerry Rice, well, he had 400 different ways to beat you. Dallas was, if you couldn't beat us man-to-man, we're just going to run the most simple plays. They run 6 plays in a row, the same play. That's great when it works.
Yeah.
But when you have the salary cap, you have injuries, you have depth issues, you have terrible drafting, as we'll talk about here. Let's go ahead and go back to that. I know we keep going back and forth, but that's kind of how this season works. When you look at, we didn't talk about the key additions. Of course, Dion.
Yeah.
Ray Donaldson, which I always felt bad for Ray Donaldson. He signs a Colt, Pro Bowler, All-Pro. He comes to Dallas, breaks his ankle.
Yeah.
Wade Wilson. That was a good signing backup-wise.
Well, yeah.
Another late great. Goddamn, I forget.
Well, we'll talk about the departures in a second, but yeah, that we definitely needed a good backup quarterback.
Yeah, we did, and we also needed a better draft. Well, I say that. You like to call this, to me, the 95 draft and the 2009 draft are the 2 worst drafts in the history, or 2010 technically.
Yeah.
That was where Jerry admitted that they thought they were drafting in 2010 with special teams players. This one was pretty bad. Sherman Williams, Eric Bjornson, and Alundis Bryce. That's your 3 keys. Now, Bjornson was solid. He had a solid career with Dallas. He had a really solid career with New England in the late 90s. But when those are your 3 guys that are notable, it's just absolutely terrible. And they did a weird thing where they traded their first-round pick. Oh, who did Tampa use for that? Oh, Derek Brooks. Boy, wouldn't you love to have seen Derek Brooks on the outside of this defense?
Hall of Fame, speedy linebacker.
Could play 4-3 or 3-4.
02 Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, and they traded them for first second-round pick. This is where Jerry was trying to show the world he's smart. I think one of the biggest reasons over the last 15 years, Dallas has become better drafters outside of 2010. And then, you're not going to hit on every pick. Taco Charlton, blah, blah, blah.
They still get Tyron Smith in the 2010 draft?
Yeah. No, yeah, that's right. They get, well, maybe I'm thinking 2009 draft or 2008. I think it's 2008 draft. It was one of those drafts where none of the guys ended up starting. And Jones literally admitted they thought it was a special teams draft. I think it was 08 because they thought 07. And I get it. You're 13-3. You're the number 1 seed. Everybody's coming back. But one of the things that I think he finally learned was to get Will McClay, let him draft, and actually draft every year like you need to draft.
Yeah.
In 95, 95, 96, Kavika Pittman, Shante Carver, that group, Jerry Jones was trying to be the smartest man in the room. That's where the trade downs and the trades up and all that. But anyway, so going back to players they lost: Rodney Peete, Alvin Harper, Mark Stepnoski, Tony Casillas, James Washington, Jim Jeffcoat. Funny thing is Stepnoski and Casillas both end up back at the Cowboys by the end of their careers. I always felt bad. We talked about this in the 93 when I felt bad for Rodney Peete because he kept the 94 team going when Aikman missed significant games in that one, important games.
Yeah.
That's why in 93, Aikman, I think, was 13 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He didn't play a lot. And I always felt bad that Pete had to be on the Eagles because he plays such a big part in the Cowboys succeeding this year because he gets hurt, and that's the Randall, I don't know what's going on game. But
we'll get to that later.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. So anyway, so as we talked about, they start the season 8-1. Their only loss was to Washington. They beat Kansas City on Thanksgiving Day. You felt, okay, yeah, they lost to San Francisco, but man, they beat a really good Kansas City, and that was a really good Kansas City team.
Yeah, they had the best record in football. They were 13-3.
That's so crazy to think in 95 with Dallas, with Green Bay, with San Francisco, that was Kansas City, but also because you had Dallas, Green Bay, and San Francisco all in the same conference.
Yeah.
So they beat the Chiefs, and you think, man, I remember thinking, okay, they're good.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next 2 weeks happen. They lose to Washington. They lose to Philadelphia. We just talked about that. And then they get to the Giants. And the Giants at this point were just kind of there. And they were, I think at that point, in a 5 or 6 game losing streak. They were terrible. This was the Giants struggling. Dave Brown's your starting quarterback. Rodney Hampton's still there, and Rodney Hampton's basically what kept him in this game.
Honestly, he was the same quarterback last season that led him to a 9-7 record.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
you felt he would carry it on to 95,
but he wasn't.
Yeah, correct.
And so in that game, and he wasn't great. He was 10 of 20, but
he was great running the ball.
Dave Brown? Yeah.
Yes.
He had 4
most of those were in the first half.
Exactly.
I was watching this game. Dallas had lost those 2 prior games. I'm like, okay, we're about to lose a 3rd straight game because Dallas can't stop Dave Brown from getting a first down with his legs.
Yep. And Rodney Hampton was absolutely pulverizing the Cowboys. 187 yards. But Dallas being Dallas, they just kind of figure out a way to get into it. They couldn't. And it wasn't that the Giants were stopping them, but the Giants were doing what the Cowboys defense now does, just holding the field goals.
Yeah.
Dallas got a field goal in the first quarter. Dallas got a field goal in the third, 2 field goals in the third. It wasn't until the fourth quarter when Dallas made it 18-17. They tried a 2-point conversion, but I still remember, I thought, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Dallas had kind of figured out the Giants. They'd held them scoreless, but then in one of those classic moments, Giants moved down long enough to get a field goal, and they go up 20-18. And when you and I first started hanging out and we started comparing notes and stuff, I told you one of the most underrated plays was Kevin Williams on 3rd and 10 against the Giants late in this game.
Yep.
If he doesn't make this catch, I don't think Dallas wins, and I think the whole season completely changes. And here's that play. And if you don't remember this, watch this play.
Yard. Another first down. Aikman retreats. Still no blitz. The pass is caught by Kevin Williams. A catch for Kevin Williams. He's come out of today.
He's getting out of it today. That was a great catch. I mean, he got open and he just lays out. Watch how he stretches out to catch that ball. I mean, not only stretching out, getting your hands out there, making that catch, but then holding on to it. I mean, look at that.
Whoa, that's a heck of a catch.
And this was in an era where 4th and 10 was basically a death knell.
Yeah.
This is before Freddie Mitchell and 4th and 17 and Aaron Rodgers and certain plays. But this was a different era. 4th and 10, especially for this Dallas team at this time that just offensively had gone completely stale. And not only that, but it also Kevin Williams in the very next game against Arizona has the 200-yard effort and causes Jerry Maguire to confuse a lot of people. I've had this argument before with people who don't know sports, but thought that the Cardinals beat the Cowboys that night because of Jerry Maguire. I'm not kidding. I'm multiple. This is more than one.
Yeah.
And I've had to explain, like, that's a movie. And yeah, they filmed real events, but that's not how the game broke out. But anyway, not only that though, that ain't quite what saved them. That saved their season. But what really saved their season before they even played Arizona was San Francisco kind of started showing maybe there was something missing with them, because all they had to do was beat Atlanta. You beat Atlanta, you've got home field advantage. You're about to go back-to-back Super Bowls. You're about to legitimately talk about who's the true dynasty of the 90s. And, of course, Denver. Think about if it had been Dallas 2, San Francisco 2, Denver 2. That would have been a fun discussion.
Oh, yeah.
And then they go into Atlanta and lose. And this was a solid Atlanta team, but not a great. They were 9-7.
Yeah.
But not only did they lose, but they lose 28-27.
Yep.
And that, I mean, they've talked about it. Irvin talked about it. Aikman talked about it. They're on this plane. I think in the book, Jeff Pearlman wrote about that season. Yeah. Basically, they were on the plane accepting that they were going to be the number 2 seed and they were going to have to play in San Francisco, and they land in Arizona. And I think Troy said it was like the season started over because they found out that the Niners had lost.
Yep.
They go in and they dominate a Arizona team 37-13. As we talked about, Kevin Williams, this was on Christmas night.
Yep.
Kevin Williams had a huge night. He had a 48-yard touchdown, a 25-yard touchdown. I think he had 220-something yards, 203 yards reception, 2 touchdowns. And that completely changed the season. And then you still felt, at least I did in the back of my mind, I did not want to play San Francisco.
Yep.
And thank you, Green Bay.
Yep.
All right, so let's go ahead and go to the overall of the league. So 1995, as you can see on our thing, we have the tree. Hang on, let me stop this video for a second and show right there. We have the tree. You have Cowboys, Steelers. On the NFC side, you had the Falcons, the Lions, the Niners, the Eagles, the Packers, and the Cowboys. On the AFC side, you had the Chargers, the Fins, the Chiefs, the Bills. Forget, the Bills still were making the playoffs.
Yep.
And then the Colts, and then, of course, the Steelers. As we talked about in the 93, beautiful helmet playoffs.
Very.
I love the diversity of the helmets. You got some red, you got some white, you got one black, just saying. 10%, I don't know. But it was a fun playoff and a great looking playoff. But anyway, so let's go back to put the video back up. So you go to the playoffs, and so again, you're at a young age, so you're still seeing it different than I would have at this time. What are you thinking? Are you like, hey, we're back, we're good, with the number 1 seed, we're going to go to the playoff, we're going to win the Super Bowl, or were you still worried about San Francisco?
Oh, super worried because I still had the regular season game in my mind. They knew how to match up Jerry Rice against our secondary.
Yep.
And Dallas just did not prepare.
I didn't even think about that. Perfect example of what I'm talking about, where Dallas relied on the coaching was not scheme. Dallas relied on our man will beat your man. So San Francisco said, okay, we're going to put our guy in the slot where Dion never goes.
Yep.
And all week long, all you heard was Dion versus Jerry. And if I remember in the game, they only faced each other like 7 times, and Jerry had no catches, but putting him in the slot. And at this time, they understand. It's funny because Larry Brown's going to have a really big playoff, but that was also the 94 title game. And that game, Jerry Rice abused Larry Brown.
Yep.
They figured out that with Larry Brown, if you kept Steve Young upright, you gave Jerry Rice enough time, he would eventually be able to beat Larry Brown. And that, again, that goes back to what I'm talking about. Dallas didn't know how to adjust schematically. And that's really weird to say that. Yeah. But anyway, so the playoffs start. Buffalo beats Miami 37-22. Philadelphia beats Detroit 58-37. That's the famous Lomas Brown for the Detroit basically guaranteeing a win or saying something like, there's no way in hell we're going to lose.
Well, at that point, so both of those wild card games you just mentioned, they were blowouts. Buffalo was up, I think, 27-0.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. That 22 was late. And the 37 for Detroit, it was, I think at one point it was like 45-7.
It was 51-7.
51-7.
Yeah.
Okay, I knew it was something like
so
that. Yeah.
The final score is 58-37, a 3-touchdown win. It was not that close. So these were like big blowout games. And the sad part is, I mean, this was Don Shula's last game.
Yep.
So after this, he retires, and then 96 season, Jimmy Johnson becomes the head coach for the Dolphins.
Yep, 100% right. But so anyway, so that's the first round of the playoffs. Second round of the playoffs,
Oh, sorry, and to finish the wild card.
Oh yeah, finish the wild card. Indianapolis beat San Diego 35-20. Green Bay beat Atlanta 37-20. None of those were real shocks. I know some people thought Detroit might beat Philadelphia, and Detroit might be a toss up, but at the end of the day, Philadelphia was at home.
I was saying that the Colts winning, it was I think Zach Crockett.
Zach Crockett, that's the name I haven't thought of.
He did nothing during the regular season, and he comes out and just has a big game.
Yep. And then in the second round, the division, this was the first. Wow, Pittsburgh not beating Buffalo, but they beat them pretty bad, 40-21. But then the shock,
the real shock,
even
considering who didn't play for the Colts in this game.
Oh, I was talking about we're talking about two different games.
Oh, never mind.
No, we're going to go Colts. What you want to talk about?
Marshall Faulk didn't play in this divisional round against the
I was talking about the Green Bay upsetting San Francisco.
Oh,
but you're right. We'll say that. Okay, so you're right. Indianapolis beating Chiefs. Yeah, at this point, Jim Harbaugh, quarterback. The Colts had come in 9-7. Yep. They just they won ugly. They never were pretty. Even in this game, Jim Harbaugh threw for 112 yards. Lamont Warren ran for 76 yards. He was the leading rusher. Yeah. But what the Colts did well was play defense. Yep. And I know a lot of people want to talk about the infamous, drafting Ettman and Coriat back-to-back picks. But Quentin Coriat there for a while was a really good linebacker. Yep. And he had a really good game in this one. He had the interception that sealed the deal. He had 9 tackles. He had 3 tackles for losses. He forced a fumble. And I think that gets lost because of him and Edmund. And Edmund's issue was injuries. I mean, Edmund would have been a really good defensive tackle. Now, you can make the case, again, like I even said with Dallas, do you draft a defensive tackle with your first pick? I don't know. But to me, the biggest upset was Green Bay and San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, Green Bay kind of exposed what was wrong with San Francisco. And to me, the big problem with San Francisco is they didn't really have a running game. They relied on the passing game, a prolific passing attack. But,
well, at this point, William Floyd got hurt.
He got hurt. This is his second season in the NFL too.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, attitude wise, like I said, he brought what like Irvin brought to the Cowboys. He brought that edge, and he was also he was a fullback, but more like a halfback. Yeah. Ricky Waters had went to the Eagles. They had Derek Lavelle.
Yeah, I mean, if you look in this game, though, Lavelle had 8 carries for 5 yards, and then Jerry Rice had 1 carry for 5 yards.
Well, and that's what the Niners got away with it at times because they were so talented. They didn't have to have a run game. Yeah. But when you have to throw 65 times like Steve Young did, and he threw for 2 interceptions, I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but the Packers, Brett Favre Packers won because even though they didn't get a lot of yards, they committed to running the ball 28 times. Yep. They threw 28 times. They ran 28 times. Now, they didn't have a lot of yards, but that kept San Francisco off the field. Yep. Brett Favre, 299 yards, 2 touchdowns. Basically, what happened was the Green Bay jumped out early and just basically held on, and San Francisco could never quite get that big play to get them back into the game. And I will go ahead and say it now, even in Dallas, I don't think Dallas beat San Francisco in a title game. I think at this point, the one thing you give Dallas credit for that San Francisco didn't have was San Francisco only saw Dallas as the next threat. They didn't realize that you've got to beat the Green Bays of the world too, and they didn't that year. And then Dallas in their divisional round, they played the Eagles. That was the famous game where Rodney Peete tries to show he's a man, and he runs into Darren Woodson, and that's a fight you don't win. He knocks him out of the game. Up to that point, it was a competitive game. Yeah. And Randall Cunningham, who had been benched, comes in, basically admits because he was having a kid that he hadn't paid attention to the playbook. Randall Cunningham was not the team was not a fan of Randall Cunningham, like the players. You would think it'd be the exact opposite because he was the franchise quarterback, but the players were not happy that Randall Cunningham was on the team at this point, because they felt he checked out. And later on, he admitted, I did. I mean, I don't blame him. He had a kid. He thought his season was over, But anyway, so that sets up the not expected Green Bay versus Dallas. The first time since the Ice Bowl that Green Bay and Dallas would play in the NFC title game. I had no doubt Dallas was winning this one. Green Bay just did not match up well defensively against Dallas when it came to that running game. And it sounds so funny saying that because you think of Reggie White, you think of Gilbert Brown, I loved Gilbert Brown. He was fun to watch, but he was fat. I mean, that was his strength. He was fat.
Yeah, he was definitely a clogger.
The problem is you were going up against Nate Newton and Larry Allen, who were fat, but also quick and athletic and strong. And not saying Gilbert Brown wasn't strong, but I'm just saying he was a plugger. They ran a 3-4. He just plugged the A gaps. Well, first off, Dallas didn't care to run in the gaps. They were happy to run B and C gap, and that's what they did in that game. But the game was good. I mean, Dallas jumped out early and looked like they were going to roll.
Well, I mean, your prediction almost came true because the Packers, I think, didn't even get a yard.
Yeah.
After the first 7 plays.
Well, and that was at the time where Brett Favre. Well, okay, so 2 things. First off, Brett Favre notoriously in big games started slow, and also there's a reason he struggled in Dallas. Texas Stadium had a crown. Now, if people don't know what a crown is, when you're on a football field and you look across the field, it's not flat. Every field has a rise in the middle of the field. That's just how it works. Well, Texas Stadium notoriously had a high crown, meaning if you normally threw the ball at a helmet, like if you threw at the helmet of a player, you needed to throw at their waist because the crown would carry. Well, he could never adjust it. That's why Brett Favre literally struggled at for like a quarter to a half at every Cowboy game because he was so amped up and he was overthrowing everything. So Dallas jumps out big. But here's one thing. For all the talk about special teams in that era, the Cowboys had another punt block. That happened a few times in big games for them. Now, most of the time, like in the Super Bowl against the Bills, and in this one, they're able to move on. But it is funny because you think of that era of the Cowboys, you think of Kenny Gant, Bill Bates, great special teams. They were always struggling with kickers, and they had a tendency to give up punt blocks in big games. But Dallas jumped up. They're up 7-3. Michael Irvin got a touchdown. Leon Lett intercepts a pass. Dallas gets another touchdown, like almost back-to-back plays. It's 14-3, and it looks like everything's going gold, and then Brett Favre woke up.
Yep.
He hits Robert Brooks for the big play. It's 14-10. Antonio Freeman had a good punt, and then he hits whoa Nelly Keith Jackson for the big one. Keith Jackson was a favorite of mine, and all of a sudden Green Bay's up 17-14.
Yeah,
but I can still remember watching this game going, they're not going to stop Emmett when it matters, and that's what the drive at the end of the first half,
99-yard drive,
99-yard drive, the very first play. Emmitt Smith, lead draw, goes for like 26 yards. And from that point on, it became a back and forth, but Brett Favre was going to make the mistake at the end of the day. And that's exactly what happened. And lo and behold, Larry Brown.
Oh, yeah, in the second half. Yeah.
Well, that's the play that broke it. At that moment, they were going back and forth. Packers, Cowboys would score to make it a 2-score game. The Packers would bring it to a 1-score game. Cowboys would score to make it a 2-score game. But at this point, Larry Brown had a huge interception. This wasn't like a Neil O'Donnell. He just happened to be there. He made a great play.
It's a great play.
Breaks on the play late, gets an interception. Green Bay's final 2 possessions ends with turnover downs. The Cowboys end up winning. Aikman, 21-33 for 255 yards, 2 touchdowns. Michael Irvin, 7 catches, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. But at the end of the day, Emmitt Smith, 150 yards, 3 touchdowns. And at one point in that second half, I think he had 75 yards untouched, meaning he was getting yards. And this is where the whole perception of Emmitt only, he didn't have to run hard because he had an offensive line. In this game, that's right. This offensive line was blowing the Packers off the ball 4 and 5 yards by that fourth quarter.
And if you've never watched this game, please go back and watch. This is one of the best NFC title games you'll ever see. This was such a good game.
Yeah, the emotion of the game, everything about it. Just you're seeing, even though they lose, you're seeing the beginnings of Green Bay understanding how good they are.
Yeah,
but you're also seeing Green Bay understand what they need to do going forward. Yeah. And at this point, we always talk about the late 60s. We were in the 60s. It was the Packers always winning. At this point, this was the 3rd straight loss for the Packers in the playoffs.
Yep.
I think it was the 5th or 6th straight loss overall against the Cowboys. Yep. We joked about it, but in 96, they thought they were going to finally have their year. They make the Super Bowl, all that kind of stuff, and Dallas still beats them. And not only that, but beats them on 7 field goals. That was I still think that's my favorite win of the late 90s. Just because, as I was telling you, if you remember that Monday night, they were making a big point of that. But they were making it like past tense. Yeah. The Cowboys, they've had their way with the Packers over the last 6 years, but the Packers now are the Packers. And they had Mike Holmgren and Brett Favre, on those little insert ads or interviews on Monday Night Football where, it's been really tough playing here, but we finally got the team and then Dallas is down. This is finally our year. And Chris Boniol says, wait, hang on.
Well, I mean, to the Packers' credit, like I said with the 49ers, the Green Bay finally decided to commit to a running game.
Yep.
And Edgar Bennett had a 1,000-yard season, and Dorsey Levens came up the following year. So, they were really committed to actually running the ball, and that's kind of what made them a little well-balanced. Kind of opened room for Shimura, their tight end, to get a bunch of yards. They opened room for Robert Brooks. For some reason, the Packers always had issues with their number one receiver staying healthy consistently because 94.
I mean, that's been like that from then to now.
Yeah, because Javon Walker in the 2000s.
Holy crap, that's a name I forgot. Yeah, I mean, he was at one point. Well, him and Miles Austin.
Think about Mile High Austin.
But you bring up Green Bay, and for all the talk about did Dallas underachieve by winning 3 Super Bowls in 4 years and 3 in the 90s? You look at that Green Bay team that won their first Super Bowl, and they were. I remember thinking, oh crap, they might end up challenging Dallas as the team of the 90s because I think they might win 4 of the next 5 or 6.
Yeah,
they don't win another Super Bowl. They win 1, they go to 2, and then after that, they're good, but they can never quite get back.
The 49ers in 98 figure out how to beat the Packers.
Throw the ball to Terrell Owens 42 times?
Well, yeah, but they also developed a running game.
Yeah.
Garrison Hurst, and it was the year Garrison Hurst, Jamal Anderson.
Oh, the Dirty Bird?
Yeah, and I think it was another guy.
Well, think about
Vikings running back.
Robert Smith.
Those 3 guys just broke out in 98.
Well, we talk about this year, Dallas winning 12 and finishing second place. Well, in 98, Green Bay was 11-5 and finished 4 games out of first place because Minnesota was 15-1 that year.
Wow.
But I'm just saying, for all the talk about we want to poo-poo what Dallas did after that 95 Super Bowl, it just shows you how hard it is to get there. San Francisco, the rest of the 90s, you could make a case, had a better run than Dallas did. They only got to 1 Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Green Bay had a better run the rest of the 90s than Dallas did. They got to 2 but lost 1 and won 1.
The thing that happens is, as you see with free agency and the salary cap, is the team you have in 1 year, they might be better the next year, but you're playing against better competition. Because the salary cap and free agency, all these good players are going to teams that are on the cusp. So the team you played last year is not the same team you played this year.
No, you're 100% right. Yeah. And I think teams were adjusting to that.
And it was more of an accelerated rate after 93. And that's kind of what led to all these teams. Okay, Denver's going to win 2 Super Bowls, but that's it.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, all these teams are winning Super Bowl. There was really no chance for a three-peat. And then you get into the 2000s, and then there was a team that finally figured out how to build a dynasty in the salary cap free agency era.
I have a great quarterback.
Have a great quarterback and a great coach. The exact same blueprint that Kansas City is doing right now.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I will say that when you think of Belichick, you do think more of a defensive mastery wizard than you do the Chiefs. But, Chiefs defenses are very underrated in this era.
Yeah.
They get to the quarterback. And the 1 Super Bowl they lost, as we talked about, it was lost because their offensive line couldn't block.
Yeah, they're very sought after. You see Frank Clark got a fat contract to go to the Broncos, and then Juan Thornhill got a nice contract to go to the Browns.
You know what the Patriots also did? They normalized that you can lose a Super Bowl, come back and keep winning. In the 90s, it was still – it's different now. I can remember players saying back then that it was if you weren't going to win the Super Bowl, you'd rather just not make it because you went from being either first place or the worst team in the world. It was weird how people looked at you back then. Now, okay, yeah, you might lose 2 Super Bowls, but if you go to 7 and you win 5 of them, well, then you're still pretty good.
Yeah.
Like I say, Staubach. Staubach and those 70s Cowboys lost some Hall of Fame because people literally thought, well, yeah, but they lost 3 Super Bowls. Well, now it's like, yeah, but they made 5 in 10 years. That's we now understand as the league has gotten longer and bigger that's a big thing. And you didn't have that back then. If Dallas or San Francisco would have lost the Super Bowl in the 90s, that would have immediately negated them as a team of the destiny. You could not win. You could not lose a Super Bowl back then and still be a dynasty team. That's just how it was, right or wrong. But anyway, so Dallas wins. It would be their last Super Bowl. It was the 5th Super Bowl in Dallas, win in Dallas's 8 appearances. They were the first team to win 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. The Patriots matched that. Still nobody else has done that yet. I do think the Chiefs might this year. We'll talk about that when we do those. It was the 5th rematch between Super Bowl teams, and we'll get into the game. I just want to get all this stuff out. It was the first Super Bowl in the Phoenix metropolitan area, who should have had one a couple years before. But
it was the 27 where the Cowboys played the Bills for the first time.
Most watched sporting event ever, the 2nd most watched TV program of all time at that time, which back then everything fell behind MASH, the series finale.
Yeah.
It was the last Super Bowl to be held on a college campus. It was the last Super Bowl to have a team wear jerseys with screen printed numbers. That's crazy to think.
Yeah.
So screen printed are the ones when you look at the jerseys, it looks like you could just go peel the number off.
Yeah.
Now they stitch them in. But let's go ahead and talk about that game, because the Super Bowl between Dallas and Pittsburgh was exactly the Dallas Cowboys season in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And you could even say the Green Bay game. You start off strong. You struggle in the middle. You figure it out at the end. You need some help from your opponent struggling.
A lot of help by the opponent.
Of the 3, this is the Super Bowl I least care to see highlights for. It's a boring game. I mean, not in the moment as a Cowboy fan, not, it was all, but now looking, it's a boring game. There's not other than Neil O'Donnell throwing 2 passes to Larry Brown. Oh, speaking of Larry Brown, I want to get this
throwing 2 passes to Larry Brown.
Well, I mean, he did, but I do think that people forget about this part of Larry Brown.
For Larry Brown, football took a backseat to tragedy in 1995.
My wife at the time had actually had a baby, and we were born premature.
And Father, I do pray for Christopher Brown, just like Russell did. I pray that you would preserve him and strengthen him. Give Cheryl and Larry great endurance as they watch him in the hospital and spend time with him. And Father, may he be raised to his full health.
There's not enough words. There's not good enough words to describe what the feeling he was going through. Not only himself, but his wife and his family, and his family that was with the Cowboys.
For the whole season, we knew that there was complications here and there and things I had to deal with there. But that week was tough because he actually had passed that week, and we had to bury him.
He had the funeral the day we were leaving for a game, and that was on a Saturday. And we left out on an away game right after the funeral.
Mr. Jones left his plane for me. He said, if you want to come, it's up to you. If you don't, we understand. And I talked to my family about it, and I prayed about it, and made the commitment to go ahead and show up to the game. And I think the most moving thing of it is my son's name was Christopher Brown. When I got to the game, all the players had KB on their helmet, and I wanted to play. I wanted to play for myself. I wanted to play for my son. And it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do.
The Raiders game was highlighted by, I think, my all-time favorite Dion interception. He was covering Rocket Ismail down the field, the center of the field, and Dion went up and reached over the Rocket, snatched the ball with 2 hands, and then held the ball up in the air, and it was just like, wow.
Darren Woodson maintained the Cowboy tradition of great safeties who possessed game-changing abilities.
Darren Woodson on a big-time interception return of 37 yards.
All right, that last part was Darren Woodson. But Larry Brown, I think Larry Brown, he gets a lot of crap for being the Super Bowl MVP because of the way the 2 passes looked. And Neil McDonald made mistakes and all, but still, Neil O'Donnell said McDonald. Still, he's in the right place. He makes plays. But Larry Brown, when I think of that Cowboy team, Larry Brown, a 12th round draft pick. That's right. He was drafted when they were 12th round from TCU. I jokingly told you that Bill Bates, from 1990 till the day he retired, every year they talked in camp about how Bill Bates probably won't make the team and he'd make the team.
Yeah.
Larry was like that for a few years. And Larry ended up carving out a really good career. And you want to talk about those 2 interceptions, and they were give-me's, but again, he had the clinching interception against the Packers. He had a key interception in that Philadelphia game that gets lost because of the fourth moment. He had a pick 6. I mean, that looked at the time like they were going to back-to-back years. Him and Darren Woodson had pick 6s in Philadelphia wearing the blue double. So, by the way, you want to talk about bringing back a jersey? Bring back that blue double star. I like that look. I thought that was a cool jersey. But he gets kind of made fun of because he won a Super Bowl MVP. But at the end of the day, the old saying is you're as strong as your weakest link. And Larry Brown was probably the weakest part of that defense, yet he still – in a year had 5 interceptions, which is a lot. And we forget that. 5 interceptions for any corner in a season is a good year.
The top players in that game, I would first start off with Bam Morris and Andre Hastings for the Steelers.
Bam Cocaine Morris?
Yeah. Which would happen after this Super Bowl.
You think him and Michael Irvin were big friends? Sorry.
Hey, you know what? They hated cocaine, but they love the way it smelled.
There you go.
No, with Bam Morris, he didn't play for the Steelers ever again after this. He got arrested for possession, and then he was released.
Yeah, that was back in an era where you were cut immediately. Well, I mean, if you weren't the Cowboys, we figured a way to keep them all. But back then, especially Pittsburgh, I mean, whatever you want to say about Pittsburgh and Rooney, or not Marr and all that. Wait, who is it? Rooney, yeah. I always forget that because what's her name's the daughter
Rooney
of
Mara,
one
Kate
and
Mara,
married into the other family. But whatever you want to say about them, that's the kind of stuff you just didn't do.
So if you think about Super Bowl MVP in this game, it's 2 of those Steelers and then Brown and Chad Hennings.
Yeah, Chad Hennings had a really good game.
So that was slim pickings for this game. It was just a bad Super Bowl. Now, at the time, people were praising it because it was one of the first close Super Bowls.
Well, and that's something fans today, if you're younger than us, you don't realize that up until salary cap era, and the Packer Bronco was a good Super Bowl.
Right.
But really, the Patriots, and of course, you had like the Scott Norwood and all, but really, the Patriots started the good Super Bowls. Before then, the Super Bowl was a party.
Yeah.
I mean, you were just there to watch the halftime, to see who blew out somebody. And because from the 70s on, and it's funny, legitimately at that point, if you did the top 5 Super Bowls from 1995 to the beginning, 3 of them were Steeler Cowboy games, just on score alone. This one was an ugly game, but you got it. Hey, Bill Cowher made his name known. Onside kick, before Sean Payton did it he did the onside kick and I just think that got the Steelers in the game because again, just like the season, that first drive, Dallas looked like they were just going to roll them. I remember Larry Allen blowing up Greg Lloyd on that little. He cut off the edge for him, sealed the edge, and Emmett goes behind him, and then they hit Dion for the big play, and then Novacek's wide open, and you thought, okay, Dallas is up 10-0, they're going to roll. And from that moment on, though, again, the little things that Dallas did so well in 92, 93, they weren't quite doing in 95, and that allowed Pittsburgh to get up into this game. Now, I will say this. It felt good to beat Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't really alive. I mean, I was alive with technically, I guess, both of them, but I really wasn't watching football. Growing up, Pittsburgh was the bane of your existence as a Cowboy fan because you always heard that the reason now some of them are now in the Hall of Fame, like Drew Pearson, like Chuck Howley, like Charlie Waters. All 3 of them, I'm not kidding, they did not get into the Hall of Fame until the recent years because back then, winning was the only thing.
Yeah.
Like, there were people that felt Dan Marino shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame or Dan Fouts shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And there are people for the Steelers, and I'm not going to go name them, but there are people from the Steelers in the 70s that were borderline, but they got in because they won 4 Super Bowls.
Dwight White?
No, I think anybody on the defense is pretty good. I'm going to say it more like Lynn Swann. Lynn Swann made his name because he had big moments in the playoffs, and that's good. But let's not pretend that Lynn Swann has 9 All-Pros or anything like that. Terry Bradshaw, you can make the case for Troy Aikman. Again, you win Super Bowls in that era, and it now too, but not as much. Now we look more into the stats, the efficiency, analytical, and all that. Players can get in and not, but then you still have players like Tony Romo who probably won't get in because people go, well, he didn't win enough, even though his stats. But back then it was even more. And so beating Pittsburgh, that felt good.
Yeah,
that is the one thing about that Super Bowl that felt good. But yeah, other than that, like going back now, when I watch America's game, I watch the 95 one, but I don't pay attention because it was just it was. Again, we're going to ask this question in the very next show, but at that point, for that moment, it wasn't necessarily fun being a Cowboy fan because you just couldn't enjoy the game. They had to win because there comes a point when you win so much that you have to win.
Yeah.
And 95 for me at that age. Now, for you at 11, you probably still didn't feel that.
No, I mean, I still felt like there was more to come.
Yeah. Oh, I got to tell a little 11-year-old Noe something. Wow. I will say that.
I mean, we could talk about the aftermath of both these teams. I mean, it wasn't really that. I mean, Pittsburgh had a pretty good 97 year. Cordell Stewart, who they drafted. Slash in 95. He became their starting quarterback because Neil O'Donnell left to become a Jets quarterback. And, injuries and just underperforming. He was just not the same guy he was with Pittsburgh.
No. Well, and it was, I mean, let's remember, just like we talked about Rich Gannon in 02, this was an outlier year for Neil O'Donnell. He was a solid quarterback who had everything came together in 95 until that moment, the 2 interceptions. But let's talk about,
because he was a guy that didn't throw many interceptions.
Yeah, he was efficient. He wasn't spectacular. He was efficient, which fit perfect. But let's take a step back and look at the overall. Bill Cowher went from being lovable underdog to can't win the big game.
Yep.
Until they finally did win a Super Bowl.
97, they make it to the AFC title game, lose to the Broncos.
Had some of the best talented rosters outside of Broncos. Them and the Broncos were the 2 most talented. I'm not saying the best, but the most talented teams for the last part of the 90s.
After they lose that, they kind of tear the team down, keep Bettis and some other players, but 98, 99, tear it down, 2000. And then by 2001, Cordell Stewart's still the quarterback. They're 13-3, but they lose to the Patriots in the AFC title game.
Yep.
2 years later, gets it back to the AFC title game with Ben Roethlisberger, rookie quarterback.
Ugly.
Who was undefeated.
Yep.
They were 15-1. I think he was 14-0 as a starter. First loss, AFC title game to the Patriots.
Yep.
I'm sorry, that was 04. I apologize, not 03. And then finally 05, wild card, 6th seed. Run the table.
And then
Jerome Bettis' last year.
In his hometown. In a game that they probably shouldn't have won. Referee wise, that is the one Super Bowl that to me, the bad calls ruined the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
I mean those were not.
You're not the first person that said that. A lot of people said,
and they're not debatable bad calls. They were bad calls.
Yeah.
But give them credit, they won. But now Dallas, if you'd have told me in 95 they would not have been back to even an NFC title game at this point.
Yeah.
I thought you're crazy. In 96, they go 10-6.
One of the best defenses they've had in that whole decade.
Michael Irvin gets hurt in that Carolina game. The offense, again, this is where losing Alvin Harper because Kevin Williams could never replicate anything that he did. Then 97, that's when they start strong, but then injuries and Barry Switzer, they go 6-10. 98, they bring in Chan Gailey, they go 10-6.
But they basically sweep their division, but they couldn't.
But they could beat anybody else.
Yeah.
And then Arizona realizes that if we just send 7 guys, they can't stop them, and that's what they did.
And that was coached by the late Vince Tobin.
Yep, who just passed away this past week. In 99, we'll talk about this season one year. They're 8-8, and they make the playoffs, but they started 3-0. And not only did they start 3-0, they looked good. One of my favorite games was the overtime win over Washington. They're down 28-7. They come back overtime. Aikman pump fake. Everybody again. We go back to the William Ford. Everybody bites. Rocket Ismail scores in overtime. They beat Atlanta 24-7. They beat Arizona 35-7. They're playing in Philadelphia. They're playing well, and then Michael Irvin gets hurt.
Yeah, they're up 10-0, and then Michael Irvin fell on his head.
Yep, and they lose back-to-back games, 13. That's what I was talking about, the 2 back. Remember I said earlier, I said 13-12, 13-10. They bounced back, though. They won some key games. They beat Miami. I remember that. That was a big thing because that was Jimmy Johnson's Miami.
That was Marino came back from injury and looked terrible.
Looked absolutely terrible. This was actually game 2 against Jimmy, actually, because the first one was 96, yeah. But then they lose to the Patriots 13-6. They beat the Eagles, lose to the Jets, lose to the Saints. They do beat the Giants. I think that was a win and get in.
I went to that game.
Yeah, they had to win or they were out of the playoffs. Yeah. And then they lose to Minnesota in 99. And that was a game that they were in for a while, but they just had no offense. Again, they had no offense.
And this was 95 after the Super Bowl, that was Jay Novacek's last game.
Because he's back.
His back. He was out for 96, then he just retired.
After that.
So that was a key piece missing. After 99, Michael Irvin retired because of the injury against the Eagles. And then in 2000, Moose Johnson fullback. He also retired after 99.
Yeah, he had that weird thing where Jerry was saying he was going to be back. He'll be back next week, and then he's out for the year and he retires.
Yeah.
And so 99 was a transition, and that's when we get into the 5-11, 5-11, 5-11.
So after their first 5-11 year in 2000, when they try to, one last run with Joey Galloway as a new free agent acquisition, Aikman had one too many concussions. LeVar Arrington was the last one, and then after the offseason, Aikman retires.
Yep.
And then 2002, Emmitt Smith breaks the rushing record by Walter Payton, and then leaves to play for the Cardinals for 2 years, and then he retires after 15 seasons.
Yep.
And there's the end of the triplets.
Larry Allen ends up on San Francisco because Bill Parcells fell. And it's funny, again, for all the greatness at Bill Parcells, Larry Allen goes on to have 3 more really good years and is a Pro Bowler. And I would like to have seen him on the Cowboy team in 04 and 05 when they needed, when their offensive line was becoming a weakness. And we won't get into it. From that point on in 03, that they at least got back to the playoffs.
Oh, I still remember that one time where who was the kicker during this time period? He missed the extra point and he was like complaining to Larry Allen about something. Yeah, it was against the 49ers.
I don't know about this.
Yeah, Larry Allen, I think, was still on the Cowboys. They scored. I think it was 05. So Bledsoe's first year with them. They scored a touchdown, but they missed the extra point. Kicker, whoever the kicker was at this point, it wasn't Vanderjagt. It was someone else. It was a little guy. It was like maybe one of the
Jose Cortez.
Okay, yeah. He was complaining to like Allen about something, and Allen's like, "We just been working our butts off trying to get downfield to score a touchdown. You were complaining about?" I think he was gonna like literally kill this guy.
Great memory. That was the second quarter. Drew Bledsoe. Okay, first off, I'm about to shock you.
Okay,
Drew Bledsoe ran for a touchdown.
I'm not sure. The pocket for Bledsoe in this game was amazing.
Yeah.
It was like his 94, 96 season with the Patriots. He just had time to throw. He looked like a young guy in this game.
Well, and this was also a San Francisco team that finally was coming down. They were terrible this year. They were like 4-12. But anyway, so that is the Dallas Cowboys. That is
I went way into the future for the aftermath.
Well, I can promise you this. We're going to talk about future years, but there will never be a time where we talk about 2000 to 2002. I will admit it didn't bother me as much because of 2 reasons. A, because the Cowboys, I'm very pragmatic. Even now, if the Cowboys that too, but if the Cowboys never win a Super Bowl, I can at least say I saw 3 of them and basically was a 4th one down. But I enjoyed that. But also 2000 was fantasy football. That's when I discovered fantasy football and really got into it. And that's what will lead to our next show when we're talking about our current events, which you'll be able to find up here, down here, as we're going to talk about that. But that is a look back at the 1995 Dallas Cowboys. Again, our next recording of this type of look back, we're going to compare the 70s Cowboys versus the 90s Cowboys. I say versus, it's really not. It's more of a contrast, compare and contrast. What was the same? What was different? Because I do think it's very interesting that in the 70s of run the ball 40 times, Dallas was winning because of the diversity of their offense. And then in the 90s, when you think of run and shoot and West Coast, Dallas was winning because they just ran the lead draw 42 times a game. And I think that's interesting how the dichotomy of those 2 teams are different yet the same. And also we're going to be over at Grant's because I'm recording other stuff and it doesn't need to be a serious show. We're going to have fun with that one. That's more me and you being the nerds that we are when it comes to this kind of stuff. But anyway, thank you for joining us. You can again find us on Facebook, OutDrank The Coverage, on Twitter at OutDrankU. You can email us odtcnfl@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube if you haven't already at L4 Media Company. And until next time, he's intern Noe. I'm Terry Bennett. This has been OutDrank The Coverage, a look back at the 95 Cowboys.